Hello and welcome to my first Q&A session. I've taken questions from the Facebook group Gamers Heaven. There'll be a link to Gamers Heaven in the comments section below. First off, I'll read you out the question I was asked and then whom actually asked the question. So here goes. Out of all the games you own and played both old and new, what is the biggest disappointment? And that was asked by a friend of mine called Grant Snowden. Well, where do we begin? It took me about a nanosecond to realise which game fell into that category. I know many people would automatically go, oh well, John's going to say Call of Duty, isn't he? Oh, surely it's going to be No Man's Sky. Or how about Assassin's Creed? Well, those would be just easy to pick on. They're low-hanging fruit, which I would normally attack at any given chance. No, there is actually worse games out. Much worse games. And what annoys me more is when it's a failed license. That's probably the worst example. You get all this money behind a license and then you just shower a pile of shite all over it. Yeah, and that's what Activision did in the release of 007 Legends. It was meant to be a sort of modernised version of GoldenEye that we saw on the N64 back in the day. And it was just very poor. It looked reasonably well graphically. I mean, you know, they had the license to all the proper actors. You know, it covered movies from Goldfinger right through to like Die Another Day. It had Daniel Craig involved with it. It was out on all the big platforms at the time. And then they just wasted it. Shoveled out some shovelware fucking amateurish shite. And it really annoyed us because I was looking forward to that game. I really was. And I don't think the Windows version could have been any worse if they tried. It might be alright on the consoles, but given the previous ones like Bloodstone and such on the way, nah, probably wasn't, because Activision being Activision are just Activision. Enough said, really. The next question is asked by Loey, and Loey is the owner of the Gamers Heaven group. And obviously I am one of the admins in there. Not so much a question, I guess, but more of an open thing that you just threw out there. Loey gets lots of feedback in the back chat, which not all the admins see, because obviously people tend to go to Loey for all their problems. Anyway, basically what he asked was, some of the members cannot stand my attitude. They want to state their opinions, whether I'm going to be sarcastic or grumpy. And do they think they might get away with it without being punished? Yeah, it's a strange one. I think that part of the issue with that is it's hard to put an emphasis on how you talk in a text-based environment. Things can be misread. The Gamers Heaven group is largely made up from multiple regions of the globe. You know, we've got quite a big saturation from Asia and Europe, as spattering around from other areas around the world, but generally Europe and Asia are the main two, I would say. It's very easy to misinterpret points of view, especially when you're only doing it in a couple of lines of text. I am quite an abrupt person, I'll give you that one, and I don't suffer fools at all, let alone trolls, and I am very sarcastic. But that's just a British thing in general. I'm not going to apologise for being aggressive. My job as an admin in the group is to enforce the guidelines which I helped set in place in the first place. Same goes for Loey and all the other admins. That is kind of the point of an admin. We shift through the shit, we delete the shit, and hopefully the rest of the remaining content is quality and not too generic. I come from a background of an IT degree with about 39 years of actual experience in the field. You know, gaming is my biggest hobby. I've played literally tens of thousands of games across every platform probably known, near enough. So I think my knowledge and depth of background on the subject is quite good. You know, I've been a PC system builder for about 27 years, so I'm no slouch in IT whatsoever. So yeah, it's difficult. You know, you're going to get people that are going to clash heads with us because, you know, the youngsters know everything, don't they? Even when they don't, because they like to be right. And then you get the trolls who just like to wind people up on purpose to start a fight. And quite frankly, don't have time for that. If people are wrong, I tell them they're wrong. If they don't shut up crying about it, they get a slap. Simple. I guess what I'm trying to say is my whole role in the group is basically be the scary, evil admin, and I'll do the dirty work that other people might not be quite as willing to do. And you need that in the group. You know, if you have a lot of, I'm not pointing any fingers, but I'm just saying if you've got a lot of over pandering to the user group, you will find it'll quickly fall apart into a generic shitpost group where nobody takes action, and you're going to have the rules in place, and if you don't enforce them, they're not worth writing in the first place. So yeah, I'm not a bad guy. I'm just someone who isn't going to take any shit. So moving on, we'll go to the next question. You'll have to excuse my pronunciation, but the next question comes from Palav Chauhan, I think it's pronounced, and in which he says, which genre do you like in games? And what is your favourite game? And any particular series you want to be remastered or waiting for a sequel? I generally like quite a wide variety of games. Of late, I kind of find myself playing mostly strategy-based games or crafting-based games, that kind of thing, you know, stuff like Ark Survival Evolved or 7 Days to Die. But I do play other things as well, quite a lot. I mean, one of my other favourites at the minute has been for the last year, has been Rocket League. Like I say, I've played every kind of type of game you could think of. As a gamer who started in the 1970s in, you know, every platform under the sun, you could probably imagine there isn't going to be much I haven't really played a version of, because games are iterative and everyone rips off other people's ideas. So you're going to see a lot of the same sort of ideas in other people's games. But that said, I do have a couple of types I'm not really fond of. I'm not really fond of Japanese RPGs. I just can't really get away with the whole anime shite in general, and the translations are obviously pretty poor because you cannot really translate the ideas across from a different culture. It doesn't really work. Occasionally they've tried. I mean, the last one I enjoyed was probably Secret of Mana, so you're going back quite a while there. Yeah, and I'm not big on puzzle games. I mean, I did my fair share of stuff like Tetris and Puzzle Bobble type games, Bust a Move, that kind of thing. Not really into that kind of stuff, to be honest. They bore me. I'm not into these hit missing items on the screen type of games. I mean, those are just like Facebook games, really. You know, I'm not a mobile phone gamer, and I find that sort of gameplay pretty atrocious and really boring, really. If I wanted something quick fixed, I'd just play a bit of Rocket League. What is my favourite game though? That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. I'm going to leave that one for the end, since Stephen Findlay also asked that same question. What series would you want it to be remastered? Well, as I mentioned on the Facebook comments, I believe Midwinter, which was one of my favourite games on the Amiga back in the day, closely followed by the sequels, which was, I think, Flames of Freedom. Can't remember. I think there was a third one. It was set in Cuban sort of hot weather. Can't remember the name of it. But yeah, I believe Midwinter's getting a remake. I'm quite eager to see how that comes out because I really like that game on the Amiga. But as it stands right this minute, Elite Dangerous. Loved the original. Was it 82 or 84 when that came out with the old Acorn Electrons and BBC computers? Didn't have a BBC computer, but I had it on the Spectrum and Commodore 64, and obviously I've had all the sequels of Elite over the era as well. Yeah, so Elite Dangerous covers all the bases on that as the best remake of an original game. And in fairness, Elite did pretty much start off the whole 3D game revolution. Can't really think of much before that. I think Elite, very underrated. But a lot of people go, oh, well, what about Star Citizen then? And I'm like, yeah, try and finish a game before you can really spout on about it. It's just modular at the minute. It's not really a full game. Shouldn't be called a game until it's at least a fluent, seamless thing, which it isn't. Hopefully one day it will be, but not right now. So, there we go. Hope that answers your question, Palav. The next question is quite a long one. It was asked by Stephen Findlay, and he's asked, what was your first gaming machine, and what was the best game from that era? Well, as I've already stated, I started gaming in the sort of mid-70s. It would have been a Pong-based console. It was probably the Grandstand, although there was quite a few variations. I think Binatone had a similar system, which I also had. Those probably landed around about 76, 77, that sort of neck of the woods, just as Star Wars was doing the rounds at the cinema. Yeah, I'm that old. I've had a few other consoles. I had a Magnavox Odyssey 2, which in Europe was actually called a Philips G7000. That was basically a rival to the Atari Walnut Special, and later the Intellivision, which was one of my favourites of the batch. At the same time as I was a first-gen console gamer, I was also first-gen computer gamer, starting on stuff like the Jupiter Ace, the ZX81, ZX Spectrum 48, and the Commodore 64. There was a few other bits and bobs knocking around at the time. I mean, you had things like the Atari 800s XL. That was kind of a good one if you went to role-playing games like the old Advanced Dungeons and Dragons type games. But they got everything got ported between every system. There was no such thing as really system exclusives back then. I never got on board with the Nintendo thing. Nintendo wasn't a thing in the UK, at least not until the SNES landed. The NES was pretty much ignored in the UK from what I saw. It was big in America, it was big in Japan obviously, but not in general over here. By that time, everyone over this part of the water, we were all Commodores and Spectrums and Amigas and Ataris, you know, until the Mega Drive and the SNES landed, and then that was like the de facto, you know, if you didn't have a SNES, you didn't have a Mega Drive, or you didn't have an Amiga, you weren't really, you know, it's like the modern era with the multiple systems you have now for platforms. So, let's have a look. What was the best game from the era? Well, the problem right there is there's so many different platforms in such a short space of time. Everyone was jumping on board with this brand new technology. Gaming was in its infancy. It was generally relegated to nerds down the chess club and that kind of thing. But it wasn't. It was just, like most technology, it hadn't found its footing. Some pretty good stuff came out early on. You know, you had stuff like Atari's Pac-Man. That was pretty good. Obviously, the Atari Walnut Special had that as like one of its premium titles, and Space Invaders. Those were like the big names that even nowadays many people still sort of hold up as the accolade of gaming of that era. I would say I probably quickly moved on to the ZX Spectrums as my main platform, sort of the turn of the 80s, sort of 82, 83. Favourite games of them sort of eras were things like Manic Miner, Jet Set Willy, Ultimates game series, things like Attic Attack, Underworld, a fantastic port of Elite, which came from the Acorn Microsystems side of the woods. That was on the Spectrum. That was great. Mike Singleton's Lords of Midnight, which was a fantastic game for the time. How they managed to squeeze that sort of thing into a game is unreal. You want to check that one out. Strategy games, you had things like Rebel Star Raiders, which spawned Blazer Squad, which spawned XCOM, all by the same fantastic group of people, led by Julian Gollop. Still going strong there. Glad to see it with XCOM 2 of more recent times. You know, and then you had things that were utterly shit back then. You had things like Nintendo's Game & Watch, which had things like, you know, Donkey Kong on. Maybe you had things like the big handheld consoles, desk-based consoles, which literally only had one game. You'd have something like Astro Wars or Galaxians. I even recall having a small sort of device of Battlestar Galactica, which was a fairly simple left and right shooter LED based thing. It was hideous, but it was about 1977, 78, something like that, and it's a very collectible item now, but back then that was like, you know, cutting edge. It was new technology, so yeah. Nowadays you can revisit most of that sort of stuff with emulations pretty easy on any platform. There's emulators for everything. I'm not really a big fan of retro gaming, you know, after sitting through something like, 37 years worth of platform upgrades and software development in new areas and that kind of thing. It's like, well, I've done it. I don't want to go back to that. I've waited 30 odd year, nearly 40 year to get to where we're at now. I don't want to see modern games emulating stuff that I played when I was a child. So I'm not big on the whole retro, let's do pixel art type of stuff. It doesn't interest me. It was done first and better probably originally. I think it's just lazy development that people go down that route. And so on to the next question, and that comes from Mary Stevenson. Do you stream? And do you watch any streams? And if so, what? Well, I'm not really so much of a streamer. I tend to pre-record and then upload. I find streaming while gaming a bit distracting, and obviously depends on the kind of game. You know, some games will affect the bandwidth, or to a point where it actually makes the game run worse. Or as you've seen on things like the recent PlayerUnknown Battleground, you get people stream sniping. So I tend to avoid live streaming while I'm playing games. As to what games do I watch, I've got a handful of different streamers that I do watch. Most recently, one of our admins, Darren Warman, did a stream of Destiny 2 beta. I had a look at that, watched it for about an hour, and I thought, yeah, I'll have a look at that. So I downloaded the beta, had a bit of fun, thought it was good. Outside of that, that's my level of streaming. As for what sort of channels do I watch? Well, Total Biscuit, a fellow Geordie. I watch a lot of his stuff. Angry Joe, he does some great reviews, he's got a good sense of humour. A channel I've come across more recently is Obsidian Ant. He does a lot of stuff for Elite Dangerous. Find his stuff's really well produced. Jim Sterling, can't get enough of that guy's content. He's satirical, he'll take the piss, and he's right on the money with 99% of the stuff he says. I also follow Max Corner. He does pretty good playthroughs and reviews. I like Jesse Cox's work. He's pretty good. Obviously he's part of Total Biscuit's crew. I also like technical stuff, so I'll watch stuff like PC Per. They do podcasts. I like to watch their stuff. Really into Tiny Tom Logan's work. He's a British streamer who does hardware reviews, and he's very good. I do occasionally watch the Linus Tech ones, although I tend to find sometimes he gets a bit sort of daft and doesn't always get things right. Another channel I've discovered more recently is Top Hats and Champagne, and he's got some really funny videos on there. I would suggest you have a look at them. They're quite topical and generally very much in the face of like politics, but you know, he's very much PC Master Race, and yeah, it's good fun. The next question comes from Aditya Raj, and he's basically asking, what was your first game? And if you remember, do you like space sims like Freelancer and Elite? Well, my first game was probably a Pong variation. All the first gen consoles were basically just Pong machines. I've already covered that I like the original Elite games, and I certainly loved Freelancer and Star Lancer that came before that. Also like the Free Space series. I wasn't too big on the X series though. The first one was okay, I guess. It opened some new ideas up for like the wider sort of space trading side of things, but lacked the combat, which bored me shitless really. The sequels kind of got more buggy and less interesting as they went on. Although I did like the X-Wing and TIE Fighter series, and of course Wing Commander. They also really did a good job of the space sims early on. There was another one, I think it was something along the lines of ISS. It used a lot of Newtonian physics. It was really, really hard. It was probably the most hardcore of the space sims of the time. But yeah, really do like me space sim, tradery, bounty hunting type games. That's very much my sort of thing. And obviously, more recent times, Elite Dangerous, which is pushing all the numbers that I want. And I'm looking forward to the next expansion pack. I've got the Horizons add-on, which is just about to drop release for the Thargoids into the game. And I think they've already talked about Season Pass 2 for next year, where they'll be adding even more content, which I'm really looking forward to. And if you want more news on that, I would suggest you'll have a look at Obsidian Ant's stuff on YouTube. He's one of the best at that sort of stuff. The penultimate question comes from Ian. That's a tough one to pronounce. Let's do it phonetically. Barajohin? Not really good on pronunciation. That's quite a difficult one. And he asks, which game had the most effect on your personal life? Now, I don't mean that in a negative way. It can be a game that inspired you in some way or made you change your daily lifestyle a bit. Kind of a weird question, but that's what popped in my mind when I saw the post. Well, I had a bit of think, and it didn't take too long to come up with the original first Ghost Recon game, which came out on IBM PCs around about, what would it be, about 97 to 2000, thereabouts. That neck of the woods. That game, I would say, was a foundation of quite a few friendships. Working at various factories and such at the time, I found friends who were enthusiastic about playing military shooters, and I'm still friends with them now. So yeah, Ghost Recon, the game that had the most effect on my personal life. And finally, the hardest question that I've been asked. And it'll always be the hardest question because the answers are always going to change. And that is, what is my favourite game? Yeah, that's a really hard question. Even if it was just, what's your best game of each platform, I would still struggle. Even if it was best game of each generation, I would still struggle. The fact is, most systems have multiple games in multiple genres which are excellent, and that's pretty much across the board on every platform I've ever had. Otherwise I wouldn't have bothered having them. Even the worst systems I've had, like the Wii, had some classic games. So yeah, what's my favourite of all time? Well, if you're looking at pure numbers, it's hard to say. Skyrim would be up there in the sort of upper echelon. Elite, whether it's the modern incarnation of Elite Dangerous or the original on the Spectrum. XCOM games would probably feature quite highly on my list. It's very difficult. Even things like Speedball 2 on the Amiga, Populous 2 on the Amiga as well. There's just so many good games in so many eras. It's an impossible question. It's always changing. I mean, Rocket League would feature in the minutes as well. So I don't really feel like I'm in a position to say what's the best game. It's much easier to nominate worse games, but even then there's a plethora of bad games out there. I think the best games are the ones I'm literally just going to be playing the most, even if technically they aren't the best games. And for now that would be Ark Survival Evolved, 7 Days to Die, Rocket League, and Elite Dangerous. So, sorry guys, I'm going to have to cop out on that one. I don't really agree with the idea of any one game being the best game of all time. It just changes too often. Games have always been iterative. Every developer nicks everybody else's ideas. So how do you judge who's the best game? Do you go by graphics? Do you go by sound? Do you go by how the controls and mechanics of the game work? Because you'll find if you look close enough, nearly every game's nicked the ideas from a game that come out maybe 30 years ago. So, do you give them the credit for the best game? I think overall the best game is what you think the best game is, and if you're wrong, well, it's a matter of taste and it's very subjective. And that's all I'm going to say on the subject. So, thanks for asking those Q&A questions. No doubt one of the other admins will be doing one in the near future, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to my ramblings. So that's it. We're done. Q&A complete. If you can like and subscribe the channel, you'll be informed of updates as we go along. And feel free to put a comment in if you agree or disagree with anything I've said. I'll be glad to hear. And you can find us over at Gamers Heaven on Facebook, and the link will be below if you want to join there and interact with the rest of the community. Okay guys, peace out.